Donald Trump was elected nearly 6 years ago, yet I still find myself asking, how on earth did that happen? How did the host of Celebrity Apprentice, a failed businessman who has declared bankruptcy multiple times, who lacks any obvious charm or grace, how did this man become president of the most powerful country on earth? And I'm not the only one. Every major media outlet has a library of think pieces on the subject. Sure, there are a number of factors, racial, economic, and more. But in a new book called After the Ivory Tower Falls, How College Broke the American Dream and Blew Up Our Politics and How to Fix It, author Will Bunch asks us to consider one specific factor: America's educational divide and how Trump exploited it.
We won the evangelicals. We won with young. We won with old. We won with highly educated. We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
Yeah. Bunch describes Trump's presidency as collateral damage from a rigged system where college now locked in America's gross inequality, a gilded adulthood for a select few, and backbreaking debt for millions more, while everybody else, locked out of this knowledge economy, were told they must be a sucker or a loser. And the stats are hard to deny. Bunch points out that in 2016, college-educated white voters favored Clinton by 55 to 38%, while Trump won the much larger pool of non-college white working-class voters, 64 to 28%. That powered Trump to narrow Rust Belt wins that ultimately gave him an electoral college victory. The stark numbers showing a deep split down the middle of America between voters who felt they were enlightened and those who resented that other half. But according to Bunch, it didn't have to be this way. He laments a missed opportunity in post-World War II America, saying that an explicit commitment to make universal higher education a human right, backed both legally and financially by the federal government, might have rivaled Social Security, Medicare, or the Affordable Care Act in rewriting the American social contract to the benefit of millions, but no such bill was passed. So, short of going back in time, how can we fix what Bunch calls the college problem? Let's ask the man himself. Here with me now is Will Bunch, Philadelphia Inquirer national opinion columnist and author of After the Ivory Tower Falls. Will, thanks so much for joining me. Let me start by asking you this. When people talk about the educational divide, the college divide, college-educated whites going for Democrats, non-college-educated whites going for Republicans, what are we actually saying here? Because we have to be careful about the implications of this political and educational divide, don't we?
Yeah, it's complicated because obviously there's a lot of overlap between education and income and class, and we tend to throw these terms around a lot. But what's been fascinating about the Trump era is when you drill down into the numbers, the divide is really education. For example, Nate Silver drilled into the 2016 results, and he found that counties like Suffolk County, Long Island, that had high incomes but a kind of a low degree of college diplomas, a lot of cops and city employees who weren't college graduates, Trump carried those areas, and vice versa. Areas that have high education but lower incomes, college towns, for example, went overwhelmingly for Clinton and for Joe Biden in 2020. So clearly, the fault line in America has become education, with Democrats becoming the party of the college-educated and the working class, particularly the white working class, heavily Republican. And now there's a lot of debate and discussion about whether the Latino working class and other non-white groups who are in the blue-collar economy are thinking the Democratic Party isn't for them, that it's for educated elites, and how is that going to shape the 2022 midterms?
And of course, one of the obvious ways to try and bridge the educational divide, get more people into higher education, is obviously to make it more affordable. And the way to make it more affordable, or one important way, is to deal with the debt situation. In your book, you call student debt cancellation a hard sell by itself because of, quote, potential fallout from the 63% of Americans without a bachelor's degree, in addition to grads who've already paid back their loans. So can you describe the modifications you're suggesting Biden or whoever wants to pitch this plan of student debt forgiveness, what they should make to make it an easier sell? And do you think Biden will even do it ahead of the midterms?
There's a lot there. Well, I think the biggest thing is we need a broad attitudinal shift, that we need to start thinking of higher education as a public good. just the way that K through 12 education has long been accepted as a public good in this country. And if we do that, we can see how, forgiving student loans is something that benefits society. It gets so many young people out of this debtor's prison that they're in now, where they can't afford to buy a home or can't even afford to get married in some cases, and still living in their parents' basement at age 31. Society benefits as a whole when we get these people out in the economy. I mean, my advice for President Biden, though, would be to think big, right? Because if you just do big debt forgiveness, then what about the freshmen who are entering college this month, right? They're taking out loans to pay for their education because tuition hasn't gone down. So, we need to, I think, look at some of the bigger, bolder plans proposed by the likes of Senator Elizabeth Warren, where we look at things like a wealth tax, and use that to have free public universities.
And aside from student debt cancellation, you have a fair few other proposals in the book. You write that, quote, universal national service could help us fix the college problem. What do you mean by that, and what would it look like?
The biggest problem in America that most people are seeing these days is the fact that we're not getting along. People talking about this country being on the brink of a civil war, which is kind of crazy, but it shows the level of bitterness we're at. And I think there would be so many benefits to having a universal gap year at age 18, where the government pays for people to do a year of student service. 18-year-olds get an additional year to figure out what their aptitude is, whether they should be going to college and what they should be studying if they do, or to get into a different kind of career program or different opportunities. And they'd be working together side by side with people from different parts of the country. You'd have people from red states and blue states, from cities and from Rust Belt areas, working together on projects like civilian conservation, for example, and it would really benefit society.
One last question, Will. In your state of Pennsylvania, Republican gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano is trailing Democrat Josh Shapiro, but still has a pretty good chance of winning the highest elected office in a key swing state. Explain to our viewers how a candidate as extreme as Mastriano, a purveyor of the big lie, an attendee of a QAnon conference, accused of being a Christian nationalist, how is he able to be viable in a major American state in the year 2022? Is the educational divide behind that too?
To some degree. I mean, I would remind people that Pennsylvania is a state that was won by Donald Trump in 2016. And, clearly there are a lot of parallels between Trump and Mastriano, except that Mastriano is even more extreme in his Christian nationalism. He has an extreme agenda that would slash education, and he has an extreme attitude about voting rights and counting the votes and going into the 2024 election. But Pennsylvania is a state with a lot of rural towns and a lot of cities that lost a lot of factory jobs over the last 30 or 40 years. People have turned to religion. The Christian appeal plays well. People are spending too much time on Facebook and these other sites and are buying into some of these theories about the stolen election or QAnon, which is very adjacent to the Mastriano movement. And it's a solid core of at least 40% of the state. The question is, can other factors like voter anger over inflation put enough swing voters over the top? Right now, it's not happening. But, if things deteriorate in the economy, for example, between now and November, there's a threat that he could win.